Continuing with my Excel learning curve, I spent time revisiting formulas and functions, especially the ones that repeatedly show up in data analytics. Since I already had a dataset I was comfortable with, I continued using the same one for revision. I started with formulas and basic math operators. One simple but important reminder was how the equal sign works in Excel. When you type equal, you're referencing something else, usually another cell, either by typing it or selecting it. It's basic, but when you are relearning, even fundamentals can slip. Reinforcing these early on helps later when things get more complex. Comparison operators felt easy at first, but things got confusing when I revisited relative, absolute, and mixed references. This was one of the hardest concepts to wrap my head around again. At one point, I misunderstood the terminology completely and thought mixed references were being referred to as relative ones. After some frustration, a different explanation finally helped clear that up. Along the way, I revisited how Excel handles logical values internally. 0 representing false and 1 representing true. I also ran into common formula errors, which usually just mean Excel doesn't understand what you're trying to do. Another key reminder was that text values need to be wrapped in quotation marks. Otherwise, Excel won't treat them as text or string. One thing I strongly agree with is avoiding hard coding values into formulas. Locking references properly and building dynamic formulas makes them far more flexible. When errors did come up, using ChatGPT to quickly identify and fix them turned out to be a big time saver. After that, I moved into logical functions, starting with if. It's essentially cause and effect. Check a condition and return a result. Nested if statements, though, can get messy very quickly. Using and, or ifs usually leads to cleaner logic. Ifs took some time to understand. Initially, I didn't get why true appeared as one of the conditions. Eventually, it clicked. True acts as a final fallback, similar to an else condition. If S works best when you are evaluating multiple defined outcomes instead of simple true or false logic. From there, I reviewed math functions. Count and its variants like count A and count blank behave differently depending on whether cells contain text or blanks. Functions like sum, average, min, and max handle blanks differently. Many issues with count functions come down to value errors, which usually means the inputs need closer inspection. I then moved into statistical functions. I revisited why median is often preferred over average when outliers are present, since extreme values can skew the average. Standard deviation helped explain how spread out the data is, while quartiles added more clarity, especially when identifying where the middle portion of the data falls. Mode felt familiar, straight out of basic statistics. When I got into array formulas, traditional arrays felt rigid and messy. Dynamic arrays were much easier to work with. And functions like unique and sort stood out. Plus, referencing spilled ranges using shorthand like R2 hashtag felt far more efficient than manually selecting ranges. I also noticed how blank values can interfere with functions like median, so filtering them out becomes really important. Using median with if is in an array helped handle that. I also used sum product here. The reason for this is that in older versions of Excel, before modern dynamic arrays existed, the sum function couldn't operate over arrays. Sum product was required instead. Using it provides a safer way to perform array calculations and still share the file with people using older or legacy versions of Excel. Lookup functions were probably the most enjoyable part. I revisited VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and XLOOKUP. All lookup functions return this first match, but HLOOKUP can be confusing depending on how the data is arranged. For multi-condition lookups and bucketing, XLOOKUP is far more flexible, I'd say, and often removes the need for nested if functions or statements. Text functions came next. They are useful when working with smaller text-heavy datasets. For larger datasets, Power Query is usually the better option. I practiced combining columns, splitting text, and extracting specific values. Text split stood out for being dynamic and straightforward. I also reviewed date and time functions, which were relatively straightforward. During final analysis, I noticed functions like sequence, hour, and COUNTIF being used together. Without properly locking references, it's easy to run into reference errors, especially when those results are later used for visualization. The reason I spend so much time on formulas and functions is because this foundation carries directly into DAX. Understanding Excel functions makes it easier to grasp how DAX expressions are built. Now, I'm moving into visualization. While tools like Python are often praised for charts, Excel's built-in visualization capabilities are extremely powerful, especially when it comes to customization. I'll start with the basics, move into advanced charts, then chart statistics, and finally sparklines. That's where I'm right now.